Well, the market has been fickle, to say the least, and seemingly undecided about what to trade on and what to ignore. Now, some of it would seem to be bullish, some bearish, and some of it not even worth worrying about until it even materializes at all. There are a lot of moving parts and things at play, none of which, it seems, big enough to move the market in one direction or another. We'll see what Kohli and Cavanaugh have to say about that coming up. The guys are brought to you each week by the Allen County Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau is looking out for the interests of Hoosier Farm families in a lot of different ways, one of which is they've got a county fair toolkit that you can get your hands on. It's got all kinds of good things in it, including yard signs, welcome banners, and a lot more as well. You know, your membership supports all of that. So go online to it, paystobeamember.org. David, let's start out with the export sales numbers this week, because that was one of those things that got interrupted with the holiday midweek, and we didn't get them out until the end of the week. And even when we did, that was even more confusion.
Yes, definitely. So wheat came in at 490,000 metric tons. Now look at this. Corn came in at 511,000 tons. Japan was a big buyer, 371. But unknown guys canceled 418,000 tons of corn. Hey, if they hadn't have canceled, it would have been over 1 million. And on the beans, they came in 556.5. China, yes, was a big buyer, 214. Egypt bought 158. Egypt has been very, very consistent about buying soybeans from the U.S., so that's good news as far as I'm concerned.
Wow, John, China being the top buyer?
Especially with the conflicting information that's coming out of China, is because we were talking last week about how 30% of their growing areas got some severe drought problems. But China's come out and said, no, their crops are fine. They expect to have a above average corn crop and everything's looking good.
Okay.
And then they step in and buy a chunk of beans out of the U.S. Okay, why are they doing that? Because China is not importing as many soybeans this year, and they're taking fewer beans from the U.S. 66% of their beans so far this year have come out of Brazil, and the U.S. is down somewhere in the vicinity of only about a third of their purchases, and we're usually closer to 40%. So what's the truth here? What's going on?
Yeah, well, and that's the thing, you know, I mean, if China's lips are moving, they're probably telling us something that it really isn't completely true.
Come on.
Yeah. But to your point, John, about the weather, David, that's one of the things I think that has kept this market really undecided about how to play it. Well, let's start with the hot and dry weather pattern that we've been having. It hasn't really exacted a toll on most crops yet, but it seems if some parts of the grain belt don't get rain soon, that picture could change. But then on the other side of it, you got people who got too much rain, David.
Exactly. Wisconsin's going to be getting a bunch, 2 to 4 inches of rain over the next 2 days. A lot of places, Iowa also, and so is Minnesota getting a lot of rain. But here's the real story. It just came out yesterday that the drought index outlook is looking for droughts to start forming between Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio. In fact, it's just north of us where the drought is going to be starting to really sink in. So keep that in mind, because the next 3 months, from the 20th of June to the 30th of September, and this is coming out from the U.S. Weather Services, so this weather market is definitely pointing toward that. And how come the beans are noticing that all of a sudden? They're up today, whereas wheat and corn are down, John.
Well, let's face it, the market right now is just waiting to see what's going to happen. You know, we're getting all kinds of different forecasts. You're hearing some talk about drought, and then the 6 to 10 day forecasts for the last few days for the entire Midwest has been above normal rainfall. Now, over here, we haven't seen it. Of course, you know how the market is. It looks at what Iowa's doing, and that's about it. Iowa and Illinois, and northern Illinois has been getting some pretty good rains. The rest of Illinois, not the case. And I just saw the latest 30-day forecast for the Midwest, and that has turned a little drier, but it's still calling for normal precipitation during the month of July. But it's not calling for drought, David.
And that's the reason why it seems the market is really not knowing what to do, because there's so many conflicting things going on. You know, one of the other things, John, is, you know, we've talked a lot about South America. And we talked about the damage, and David has, given us kind of a better picture of what's going on with the flood damage there in Brazil. And now we're talking about Argentina. And, John, we talked about that here several weeks back when they got that bug that came in and they ended up with the stunt. But on both of those things, we don't know the full extent of what the damage is just yet for either Brazil or Argentina. That's just another one of those things that's keeping this market stymied.
Well, I guess it's keeping us all very, very confused is what it's doing. But we're going to find out pretty soon. We're entering the most crucial time of the year. We've got the acres report coming out on the 28th. And then what happens right after that, we move into the July weather, which we all know July weather is totally crucial for corn. historically, if there's any change in weather patterns, it tends to happen right around the 1st of July.
Yeah.
And we've seen that numerous times. So all eyes are going to be on the forecast as we get closer and closer to the end of June into July. And if it looks like we're going to get some pretty good rains or adequate rains, watch out, folks. We got plenty of room to go on the downside. But of course, if it continues to be mostly on the dry side or droughty type conditions, here we go through the roof. So, But right now we're sitting on the edge, not knowing what's going to happen.
David, one of the other things that's coming out, and John has called this the most important June report we get, and that is the planted acres and stocks report that's coming out next week. We'll get that just before the 4th of July week. David, one of the other things that comes out with that is not just the planted acres, but I want you to fill us in because you've got some numbers for us there, is the on-farm storage. It seems like those numbers are higher than we would typically expect at this time of year.
Yeah, look at the on-farm stocks very, very closely on the grain stocks report, because that'll say where the grain is at, where it's in abundance, and that is the major drawdown in the price. But let's look at the acreage. They're looking at a small increase in acreage on corn, 90,247,000. The previous number we had in March was 90,036. So it's a slight increase. On soybeans, it's 86,976. And in March, it was 86.510. So that's really not a statistically significant difference. Also, the wheat numbers are a little bit higher on the acreage, too. But the point I want to stress is these grain stocks have to be watched very, very carefully, because the larger the on-farm grain stocks are, the less easy buyers are from the grain companies. They're going to be looking for the prices to go lower and hoping the farmer finally capitulates, because I have an old third that I've watched for many years, John and Rob, and that is in the lowest third of the price for the year is when the most grain is sold.
Talking about prices and things like that, John, you were mentioning in a conversation we were having about the difference in values of currency. And it seems like we're not in a real good position here in the U.S. with a strong dollar, and others. And it's no surprise to your point that you made earlier about the amount of Brazilian soybeans that are going to China when their currency is much lower than ours.
Yeah, exactly right. The Brazilian real has been in a downward spiral, as has the Chinese yuan, and that's hurting demand from the U.S. For agricultural commodities. So that's another negative that's in the markets. But let's face it, we can talk about those things for quite a while, but the only thing that really counts over the next 2 months is weather.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and it'd be interesting to see this report coming out next week. Actually kind of looking forward to that. David, the big news in the livestock really seems to be this bird flu in dairy operations. But I guess the good news is that the biosecurity, the attention being paid to biosecurity is really heightened. And in fact, USDA has been helping out in a lot of ways on that.
Yeah, definitely. So I've been very, very concerned about this for quite a while, because you knew the bird flu was caused by migratory birds sweeping through. Definitely is a problem for the dairy farms, because beef cattle are out on pastures. They're roaming around. The only time they're really kept quiet is when they're on feed. But for the dairies, my goodness, they've got to keep the cows right there all the time. And as soon as the bird comes in with a little bit of bird flu, then the dairy cows tend to spread the bird flu. And I think that's the big source of concern going on. And also, this could have a very positive effect on milk prices here going forward, as we have to decimate these herds and decimate the amount of cows that are available for raw milk production. So keep that in mind going forward. But I'll tell you, beef demand was really good last week. Looks like people are really loading up for the 4th of July weekend, and I'm not surprised.
Wow, prices like that and people are loading up. It's just crazy, isn't it? These are extremely high prices for meat at the grocery store. Well, when it's 4th of July, you got to have that cookout. All right, John, I am sure there is something of importance that we probably forgot to talk about. So your final word today is?
Well, I want to have a couple of final words here, because we haven't talked about wheat. I'm sorry, guys, we haven't mentioned wheat. And, wheat's been in a free fall for the past couple of weeks. It's just been incredible. And we're talking about Russian forecasts. Believe it or not, the Russian forecasts are finding out maybe their wheat crop's bigger than they were saying, that there's estimates were getting down to 76 to 78 million tons. And now they're going back to 80 million tons. And ICAR has increased their expectations to 82 million tons. You mean the Russians might have been lying about how much damage was done by the bad weather? Can you imagine that? Can you believe that?
Not telling us what?
Right. Among other things, is that the Russian prices now are real cheap. we can't sell U.S. wheat because Russia's selling wheat for so cheap. So anyhow, I had to mention that. But I'd also like to bring up, we talked about soybean demand, and the export demand is running real low this year. In fact, total demand for soybeans this year, total overall demand is running at about a 20-year low. However, it's not crush that's the problem. The crush, because of increased crush capacity, has been increasing. We've had new plants coming on stream and increases in capacity at other plants, and we've been setting records. Now, I got, again, here, we talked about this before, but we got a real contrast. In May, the May NOPA crush came out at a little over 188 million bushels. That's a huge number. And once again, it's the largest crush for May ever. Now, what happened in April when the market misjudged the crush by 21 million bushels and was down around 166 somewhere? Nobody can quite explain that to me, is why it dropped so much, because margins are decent and we've got all this additional capacity coming on stream. And then May crush jumped up there again to a huge, impressive number, higher than the expectations were by about 1 or 2 million bushels. And as I said before, it was an all-time record for May. So crush continues to run at impressive levels, and it should continue that way for the balance of the season.
Thanks, guys. Kohli and Cavanaugh made possible each week by support from the Allen County Farm Bureau. And I know your local county farm bureaus are supporting Indiana agriculture every single day. And to keep up with that, Indiana Farm Bureau members can sign up for The Dispatch, the electronic newsletter that is sent out weekly during the legislative session and every other week the rest of the year. Topics covered in recent issues include the Farm Bill, the primaries, and updates from Farm Bureau task forces. To start getting The Dispatch, all you got to do is go online to infb.org. Just another one of the great benefits you get from your membership. Go online to itpaystobeamember.org.
Podcasts by Federated Media.